I just finished the anger management program that our church offers. And they're like, oh, you can help. They're like, would you like to help teach? I am reaching out to you to go through the program. Yeah. And they're like, what? I was like, I am reaching out to go through it. If you want me to teach it after we're done and help be a part of that teaching, I said, I will do it. I said, I should have done this when I was 20 and now I'm 50. So I'm 30 years. I should have done it 35 years ago.
Right.
So some of those things are a little easier to share publicly than others. But every time, and it sounds like you've had the same experience, if I share the thing that I know I need to work through, there is relief because the devil can't hold, the accuser of the brethren can't hold that over me, or just my own human nature cannot hold that over me. I tend to, again, it becomes easier to work on it because I've confessed it aloud. Do we as Christians support policies that conflict with a biblical worldview? How would we even know? We claim to follow Jesus, yet how often do we evaluate our politics through his teachings? Do our views align with the golden rule, or are they shaped by worldly norms? A biblical world view should guide how we think about criminal justice, education, immigration, and more. Yet, are we critically and biblically engaging these issues? Or are we missing contradictions and consequences because we're unwilling to discuss them? Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. Peacemaking isn't easy. It means stepping into conflict, not avoiding it, and risking discomfort to seek harmony. That's the good life, according to Jesus, not isolation, power plays, or apathy. So, how does this shape our approach to contentious topics today? Let's explore this and more on the Just a Thinker podcast. I'm your host, Brian Butka. Thank you, David Ross, for joining me on the Just a Thinker podcast for part 2, going through Brother Gleason's book, Follow to Lead. We'll probably make it through more than one chapter today. We started just with that first chapter and spent a lot of time talking about it, but I appreciate you carving out some time for us to go and discuss it further. Thanks.
Hey, glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
I think it's a great book, and I know that it's part of the training program that ministers go through, right? And I realize it's not a book just for that, but it's just the organization, the UPCI, has adopted it to help inculcate people with this, the biblical ideas of discipleship and the work that Brother Gleason put together to, again, sort of mentor people from afar. It's great to me, when I was reading it, I think this is something that really every believer should be digging into as they look to further develop their faith and they think about discipleship. That's my take, but what do you think?
No, absolutely. And I think that's what's got, chapter 2 in particular, since I was kind of, reviewing this, I tend to read books multiple times. And he talks about that, the fact that there really wasn't a distinction between, if you're a believer, right? You're a disciple, right. You're a follower of Christ. And obviously I would think the person hosting the group in their home might kind of lead it by default, but not necessarily, right? And so everybody was expected to participate. Everybody was expected to make that commitment. And, it was the emergence of the, second century, like we talked about last time, that the idea of a church building and laity, and he even mentions it in the book, laity and the clergy, right? That delineation began to happen, probably adopting from some of the cultural things and stuff around what they were coming up in. And that's why we ended up with this bifurcation in the body. Obviously Jesus was the leader. We're not going to diminish, the God incarnate. Yeah, I think you've got a little bit more oomph than the rest of us have, but he really intended, and he made it available to everybody. And I think that was another thing that was really fascinating. And again, drawing from the book, but also drawing from other studies. When a rabbi went to go look for disciples, followers to follow after him, the typical pattern was, you go to where the elite were, right? So you would go into the synagogue, look for these sharp young men that were doing the things that needed to be done, or maybe even out of the Levitical tradition or something like that. The best of the best, right? And we see that in, like Daniel, with Belteshazzar and all this stuff like that. You've got this, when they came and took him captive, they left behind what they consider to be the low class, lesser people to kind of keep the lights on in Jerusalem and in Israel. But the best of the best went back to captivity.
Right, they brought them in to be
Right.
helpers, guides.
The helpers and to elevate the society and to bring their wisdom and their knowledge and their understanding of their God and bring that into their culture. And so, that was what you did, right? If you were going to develop something or do something, you would go get the best of this. And then Jesus is going along. He's walking along the door. Hey, tax collector, why don't you come follow me?
Right.
Hey, fisherman, come with me. Let's go see what we can do here. And he extended that to other people, and we see them turn it away, right? The rich young ruler, he comes up and says, hey, sell everything and follow me. And let's see what happens, right? And it's easy to look at him and say, oh, dude, you lost out. If only you'd known, what I've done the same thing, right? So he was very much egalitarian, open door. Anybody that wants to follow me can, but if you really want to follow me, there's a price. And at some point, you got to make that decision. Am I going to follow him can he take up my cross and follow you? Am I willing to forsake all in order to follow you? And those that did, come on, the rest is history, as they say.
Right. Well, I think even in modern times, we can make a distinction between maybe someone who's a believer and who has received salvation, the salvation experience as we would describe it, right? Being baptized in Jesus' name, being filled with the Holy Spirit. That's a believer. They might be a follower, but there's probably a lot more hearers and followers in the sense of I'm a Christian versus, as Brother Gleason says in the book, if someone asks, are you a Christian? How would you answer versus, are you a disciple of Jesus? And being a disciple is distinctly different, I think, than being a mere believer or someone who says, I'm a Christian, even if it's, and within the context, I would say within our organization, right? Mm-hmm. Hopefully more than Pentecostals, Apostolics listen to the podcast. It's small now. They'll go back when our audience is large and listen. But I think even within the doors that we attend, and there's been times, certainly in probably the majority of my life, been much more of a hearer than a doer. And to be a disciple does mean something different. And I like the example that the young rich ruler, I think in scripture says that he inherited. I couldn't quickly look it up, but I remember one of the places someone had inherited money and Jesus like, hey, sell that and come follow me. I thought, yeah, that guy inherited it. He didn't earn it. He's like thinking, I'm not ever going to be able to make that back. But yes, the disciples, right, in that time, if you were the disciple of a rabbi, your goal, and correct me if I've understood this incorrectly, was to be like your rabbi.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you were going to be very obedient. So the go and sell was a requirement to follow Jesus. It wasn't a requirement for everyone, but it was a requirement for that particular one. And you're correct. He said no. And my wife and I were talking about this the other night. To be a part of the body is one thing, but to really be a disciple means if I heed that call where Jesus said, go and make disciples, and I become a disciple, and I want to make disciples and carry out the Great Commission, I will have to do things that are distinctly outside of my personal comfort zone and my personal preferences, because there's a very specific thing that we as disciples need to do. We need to be like him. We need to go and make other disciples. And that, I don't think it matters who we are in our personality type. Again, correct me if I get off track. That means we're all going to have to get out of our comfort zone to do that. There will be things that I am competent at, that God has gifted me with to be a disciple and to disciple others. But there will be things that I have to get outside of my comfort zone that will be uncomfortable for me to carry that out. Have you seen it to be different than that?
Well, and we see it fleshed out even in the life of Jesus and even today, right? He did tell them, deny yourself. And as your pastor, formerly my pastor, has said it many times, he didn't clarify that. He didn't put a thing on that. He just says deny self. And so you denying yourself is going to look different than me denying myself. But at the core, there's going to be some things in common among that, right? And so Jesus had a kind of we talk in church growth circles about, the core, the crowd, and the body, right? Or the congregation, right? The core, crowd, congregation. And so you've always, in any church, you've got the core, right? You've got those people that are fundamental to keeping things going and are involved in everything, sitting on the boards and doing all the stuff like that. And you don't worry about them showing up if the weather's bad, right? You don't worry about them taking care of their financial obligations to the church or giving generously beyond that. And then you got the crowd, which are the people that show up most Sundays. They're involved. They consider to be their church home. And then obviously you've got some others that are kind of on the fringe running around. Well, Jesus had the same thing, right? Because we see in the 12, but even in the 12, there was the subset of the 3.
Right, where you spent more time with, yes.
Right, that he actually invested more into. And then at that one point, he sends out the 70, right, in pairs. So 35 sets of them go out to do ministry on his behalf. And so they had evidently been following him around as part of this larger crowd, to the point that he recognized, you are more committed than these people that are just looking for the loaves and fishes and the healings and the teachings. You're actually trying to put them into practice. And he always extends that opportunity. And other ministers and people you would know said that, a lot of times your ministry looks like the challenge or opportunity that's right in front of you. Are you willing to step into that and see what God will do with you in those things? And we all have to do that. And I've been poor at it. I've messed it up. I don't always follow him fully, right? There's those things like that. I've had my moments and my ups and downs and stuff like that. But what's the overall arch of my life? What's the overall trend of my life? Am I trying and seeking to become more like him on an ongoing basis? Or am I, I'm either going toward him or I'm withdrawing, right? There's no neutral. So, where am I today versus last week? If I feel I'm closer, then I'm in that process of discipleship, and one of the key things is, am I trying to make other disciples? Not just trying, am I succeeding in making other disciples and multiplying myself in that manner?
And that's the difficult part, because discipleship, now I will disagree. I'm neither a licensed minister and not a pastor, and very few people probably follow me, but he says in page 44 of the book I have, and I think they're all the same version, the best place for vision, correction, direction, inspiration is the public house of worship. I'm going to disagree with him on correction there, because neither would he enjoy being corrected by the body. The body's supposed to hold believers accountable. If you say it publicly, quite frankly, you should be corrected publicly.
Right.
But also, it's not the best place to correct people in the congregation either. Now, I guess if your whole congregation is like the children of Israel in the wilderness and they're all out doing terrible things in the same place, you could give a group correction. But I think that in the discipleship, in the small group setting, that's far more effective. And I will give a personal example. I got to watch one of the breakfasts that we attend periodically together. You did not happen to be there it was a couple Thursdays ago. I was out of town last week. I did not get to hang out with everybody, but at that group, I was very privileged to experience a couple things that I think of as discipleship. One of the brothers, and as you know, most of them are local ministers, pastors. I'm the out. There's one other guy who's just a guy like me, which I enjoy being. I enjoy just being a guy there with limited responsibility. But one of the brothers was sharing really some of the challenges he had faced in parenting ultimately, and and was sharing a sincere struggle. And at first I appreciate that he was willing to be transparent in the struggle of, we faced hardship, but I felt like I've been living for the Lord. Why does this happen? And I mean that sincerely, because that's a pretty normal emotion to feel. And one of the other gentlemen, they were listening and said, I really feel I want to share something. I'm paraphrasing. I want to share something that's not going to be comfortable, but I feel like the Lord is prompting me, or the Holy Spirit is prompting me to share. And he went on to explain make some suggestions. And there was a little bit of back and forth. And it was really great to watch, because there was that encouragement, correction, whatever you would call it. Right? Some of it was encouragement. Some of it was really correction. Like, hey, I don't think you're seeing it. You might have given over this thing to the Lord mentally, but not with your heart. And another brother jumped in and shared some things. And it was really great to be present and experience, again, the vulnerability of the person sharing, and the others being willing to say, I don't think you've considered everything. And what was shared also helped me. So the Lord used that in a variety of ways, but that could not have been done, I promise. Had he shared that same thing through the pulpit, none of those men would have walked up and stopped the service and said the things that were said there. So in my very kind way, disagree with Brother Gleason on the correction. Not the congregation is not going to be the place for mass correction.
And again, I think from looking at the reading of that right there, we have the public worship temple and the private worship, the house, the best of vision, correction, direction, inspiration. I think he's thinking to the body as a whole, right?
Yeah, you'd have to be, if the whole group is off track, perhaps. But even though, here's one of the things I think about, because you mentioned the laity and clergy. He talks about that chapter 2, maybe chapter 3. In the house setting, where people were sharing, it is a lot in a smaller setting. It's a lot easier to correct even the person who's teaching, because I think we often become very Catholic in our practice and will assume that the person delivering the message is infallible. And I have heard, I've heard men focus more on that. I've heard recently even men talk about bringing people here to experience Jesus when they can experience Jesus in the coffee shop or your home, because most people we're not going to drag them first go around to the building, right? And so to assume that that's the place where they have to meet Jesus is a fallacy. It just is. And I say that because often if you and I work together and I'm experiencing that moment where I need to speak to, I should share right then. I should be like, hey, David, come to church. Let my pastor tell you some things. I need to not separate myself, because if I'm a disciple and I'm a follower of Jesus and I have the Holy Spirit, I do understand bringing people to the larger body. But even when we start relegating that the whole experience revolves around that particular place, I think we get in trouble. And I think that's one of the ways that even today it's important to discuss these things, because we can say we want the individual believers to really be disciples and disciple makers, but if we keep reinforcing it with words that are contrary to that, we're going to keep getting the same results we have been getting. Does that make sense? And so even then, it's in a larger setting, it's harder to correct. There's not a chance for discussion. And it is challenging, because if we're going to be like that early church, that early body of believers where we truly hold each other accountable, we have to find ways to even do that in the larger setting, if that makes sense. And you couldn't do it. You can't just run up the pulpit, grab the microphone when the pastor's off track, But then again, but there are moments I've thought about it. I haven't done it.
I've been forcing. I've never really had, some visitors. I'm like, good, the pastor will take care of that later, kind of thing. No, I think I'm going back to that discussion you saw that happened there. I was actually ministered at one of those meetings. Prior to that, we kind of split off into groups, and I was talking individually with one man, and he said some things to me, and I'm like, okay, I needed to hear that. There's a reason I was here today. And I think, unfortunately, now, as a newly minted minister, having been, quote unquote, on the laity side for all those many years, and then just this last fall or last summer, getting my license, I see a lot of that intimacy and personal connection and relationship among the ministry. Because let's be honest, it is for many and for all, but I mean, for some in particular, it's hard. My pastor was actually transparent here recently. He said, hey guys, pastoring is hard. And he says it hurts. And he says it's not always fun. And he talked about how he was in something, and then a song spoke to him, and how he got ministered to in that moment. And so I think we realize, and I'm seeing that when I get around other ministers and stuff like that, there is that understanding. We are called to something that's bigger than us. We are called to the hurting. You're called, and as a result of following Jesus and doing what he asks us to do, we are going to be hurt in the process, and we are going to face impossible situations. I mean, what else can you do? I mean, you've got somebody coming to your church, and they're doing wrong, and they're not listening, and this is not going to end well. You are going down a path. This is not going to end well. And you have to watch that train wreck in slow motion. Or they choose to go another way. And it's like, we can walk you through this. And if you need to leave, that's fine, but we can help you to transition, go to another church or find you another person. If I'm not meeting your needs, let's find somebody who will, but they just completely withdraw. Right. And you've lost that, or at least for that season. So we understand that. And I see that in the ministry. They understand we need to support each other. We need to be there for each other. We need to pray for one another and stuff like that. And yet somehow it's getting lost, translating to it's everybody that needs this.
Right.
Some churches do it better than others. Some ministers do it better than others. But I've told them, I was teaching recently in my church, and I told them, you're talking about fellowship. We're talking about the disciplines, right? So fellowship is one of the disciplines. Is like, I need you, but like it or not, you need me too. So
right.
Here we are, and let's walk this walk together.
Well, and I think something you mentioned, two things. One, the getting together part, and then the member part where you mentioned someone being off track. I want to chat about both of those things. It was encouraging me to see the interaction, but I also think that there needs to be, I would encourage every person in leadership in a congregation. One, Brother Gleason talks about just the discipleship process. We should all be doing it. If we're a disciple, we should be discipling others. I don't think we get out of that. I don't think that's not my gifting. I don't think we get, if we're going to be a disciple, I don't think we get out of that. in those gatherings, though, and I realize we need to have groups where we're feeding, where we might be facilitating and being more of a mentor, a discipler, and then groups where we are part, and we're maybe more of someone's, they're helping disciple us in the Lord, where we're being taught. But even in regardless of that setting, it can go both ways and should. But I think it's important too that I'll say leadership does not isolate themselves from the body, because that transparency, I trust a leader, and maybe this older, I'm slowly maturing, and I wish I were 50 years old spiritually versus chronologically. I'm probably about 30, maybe 30 years old spiritually. I'm way far from 50 years old spiritually. And I'm certain I will never catch up. And I don't mean that facetiously. It's not fake humility. It's just transparency. But along this way is I respect the man or woman who can be transparent in their struggles and continue moving forward. And I think for many pastors, leaders, that whatever the reason is, that there is a separation from the bulk, not the bulk of the body. I realize, like you said, there are different levels where someone's just coming. They're not even really, by definition, part of the body. They've not been baptized in Jesus' name. They've not received the Holy Spirit. They're more in that beginning phase. They're wanting to know more about the Lord, but they're not a member of the body. Is that pretty fair?
Right. No, I'm with
But
you.
once they become a believer, then that discipleship, that's somewhere in there. I realize if you're my pastor and there's even 20 families in the church, you're not having lunch with me once a week. I do understand that. In a congregation the size of New Life, it would be foolish to assume that Brother Shaw would eat dinner with every single person on even once a year. There's not enough days in the year. Totally get that. But as leaders, if they're connected, if in some small group setting, there might be other, whether it's leaders, other licensed ministers, but also some just guys, if it's men, right? Just some believers who are growing, because the ability to be transparent, it strengthens relationships to me. Because does that make sense? And I think one of the challenges is if you're in leadership and you want to build trust, it's not, oh, I have these failings and I still live in them. No, that's not authenticity. That's you're being a terrible follower of Jesus and you need to repent. It builds trust and encouragement when I'm around guys say, yeah, this was my struggle, help me. Or this was something I struggled with, I've overcome, let me help you in a sense. And it builds, I think it helps. That's that sense of humility. And if we get too far from that, I think it can throw us off track, because that to me is part of that discipleship process. Like the transparency, watching some people correct a brother in love and acknowledging that you probably will be upset with what I'm going to say, because I'm going to tell you that you've not handed something to the Lord that you think you have handed to the Lord. That whole scenario I was replaying this week is contrary to my nature. I love podcasts and noise when I'm driving. I had hours of silence and just trying to, there were things like, Lord, there are things that I think I've handed to you that I need to put into your hands. I keep taking it back. That was over, for hours of driving time. Just how do I give that back to the Lord? How do I let go of that thing? And playing that discussion and trying to genuinely, from that learning, hand some things back to the Lord, because I was hanging on to them and it was a hindrance. Okay, I can't make that other person do the thing, or I can't make that feeling go away. I have to genuinely give this back to the Lord. But it was in that setting that I, watched others and saw others even struggle. Okay, this is the kind of thing that creates, helps me grow in my discipleship. That has got to be, and I think that's the basis of, he's reminding us this is what the early church did. In some variation, we have got to be far more intentional about that and duplicating that, right? Is that fair?
No, I think that's fair. And that's been one of the things that I was very upfront when I started my ministry, when I started seeking the licensing, and even before I was getting licensed, I was teaching and stuff like that. And, guys, I do not have it all together. I struggled with this. We talked about that one book about the dangerous prayers, Lord, break me. Okay. I didn't pray that for a couple of months, right? It's like,
Well, those are challenging prayers.
I know I need to, not get off on that track, but I want to, but I want to mean it. And I'm not going to say it just because I'm in this book, and it can't be one of these things in the moment. If I'm going to pray that, and so, being transparent, hey guys, I struggle with this, and I'm grumpy, and if I don't get enough sleep, I'm not a pleasant person to be around. All those things like that, right? When I'm fasting, I know that I need to control myself a little more, and I fail all too often at that, and so those things like that come along and enter our lives. And so we just need to be able to have that transparency. Do I expect excellence from the person that's speaking from the pulpit? Absolutely. Do I expect them to have studied well and things like that? Absolutely, because that's what I try to commit myself to do. Are they perfect people? No. Are they going to make mistakes? Yes. Are they going to have bad days and bad attitudes sometimes? Absolutely. And so being able to get in those positions where the Lord can speak to you, and people like, well, nobody, that's between me and the Lord. Well, I'm sorry, you're part of the body.
Right. It may not be. Yes. And well, you mentioned something.
If you are off by yourself all the time, God cannot use you effectively. He will not use you. And you are not fully operating in what he's called you to do. Paul was very clear. We are part of a body. Yes. And, he is the head. We are the body, and we need to be together. And all the analogies he used, the living stones and the human body itself is a thing. I need all my organs except for the ones that we figured out. You can maybe get along without them, but,
Well, you hope none of them go bad.
My organ, right?
We don't have to cut any out of the body. But you mentioned something.
And it's not for me to judge that. That's for God to figure out. Right? I mean, he even said that the wheats and the tares are going to come up together, and I'll sort them out at the end. So there are going to be people in the body that are not helpful and not beneficial. That's where we need wisdom. That's where we need leadership and guidance to help us navigate those things. But my job is not to cull the herd. My job is try to get them in and get everybody in here. Everybody in the church is a hypocrite. Well, absolutely. Where are we going to get the hypocrites saved if we don't have them in the inside?
Well, I have a friend that's often questioning. He's a secret undercover Christian, and he's like, well, Christians do this. I'm like, no one's perfect. That's why we go. Mm-hmm. So expecting us to be perfect is foolish. You will find a great deal of imperfection, but the process will work. If you're engaged in the process, you can be discipled. But you mentioned, sharing like, hey, there are times I'm grumpy. When you do that, when you express something you're working on, how does that impact? What is the experience you get after you express that thing that you're working on? What has been your personal experience?
More often than not. I mean, I'll say it this way. I've never had somebody come up to me afterward and say, I'm so disappointed. I can't believe that you struggle with X, Y, or Z, or that you had a bad day, or that you wept about that, or you got mad about that. But more than many times, somebody come up to me and say, "Man, I feel your pain, bro. I'm walking the same thing. Thank you for that. Thank you for that encouragement." That basically not elevating myself, and I try not to make too many stories about myself or my family, but that's
that's where we
tragedy
live.
Of being a part of them. But hey, I'm the best example where I'm not going to hurt anybody's feelings. So here's what happened to me, here's what I did, and here's where I'm at now, right? And so hey, if you can overcome that, I feel I can overcome that. So absolutely, we need that.
After you voiced that, though, did you find it was easier to work through that struggle the next time?
We need to get. Again,
the reason I say that is when I have found that if I confess the thing I am working on, the sin, one, it loses control over me. No matter how painful the sinful thing is that I think no one else does but me, the second I confess it to another believer, the weight is lifted. And then I find that it's been easier to work through. I don't know if that's been your, and in the experience you got too, where others are like, hey, I understand. I struggle. That there's those things happen, right? Like there is a weight lift. And that's one of the things. And sometimes you can do that in a larger group. I just finished the anger management program that our church offers. And they're like, oh, you can help. They're like, would you like to help teach? I am reaching out to you to go through the program. Yeah. And they're like, what? I was like, I am reaching out to go through it. If you want me to teach it after we're done and help be a part of that teaching, I said, I will do it. I said, I should have done this when I was 20 and now I'm 50. So I'm 30 years. I should have done it 35 years ago.
Right.
So some of those things are a little easier to share publicly than others. But every time, and it sounds like you've had the same experience, if I share the thing that I know I need to work through, there is relief because the devil can't hold, the accuser of the brethren can't hold that over me, or just my own human nature cannot hold that over me. I tend to, again, it becomes easier to work on it because I've confessed it aloud. If I've done that in the right way with the intention of overcoming it, not wallowing it, not looking for someone to go, oh, that's okay. That's just what guys do or whatever. That's just what happens with your temperament, Brian. It builds that relationship with those around me. Like I said, those that come up to you, they've now felt the connection. Like, oh, if Brother Ross, who's growing and trying to mature in the Lord, can admit that he sometimes responds in a way that he's not happy with, right? Being grumpy. And I know, I'm sure, if he can work through it and he can talk about it, I can share with him, I struggle with the same. And that helps that person too go, oh, I do need to work through it. But just even them vocalizing that to you, they'll probably later think, I'm glad I said that to Brother Ross. When I talked to David after church, I felt better just saying, I struggle with that too. Or I feel your pain,
and
right?
It builds in accountability. You're automatically making yourself accountable for that. That's, apostolic moral purity that Brother Hussage has put together and Israel. That's a prime example of it, right? Yes. I am accountable. I have people that if I call them, they're not going to judge me. They're not going to say anything. They're going to pray for me. They're going to be with me. They're going to walk me through this. And just knowing I've got somebody that I must confess myself to, that puts a barrier up right away, right? I'm not going to go do that I'm not going to be as prone to go do things I shouldn't be doing.
Absolutely.
If I know I'm going to have to tell somebody about it,
right.
Ultimately we're all going to have to tell God about it, or it's going to be covered by the blood at that point.
Right.
One of those two things, right? Or I can talk about it now, get it under the blood now. And you can't put a price on putting your head on your pillow at night and being able to go to sleep. This world is dying for that. And we need to provide them a way to healthily bring those things out and deal with them. And as you said, not wallow in them, right, but to overcome them.
And that builds into what Brother Gleason is, the living intentionally, right? Chapter 3, the soul winning versus disciple making. And as I'm confessing those things, the Lord's half-brother, James, told us in the book with his name as the title that, and I'm paraphrasing, I think it's 5:16, somewhere around that in the 5th chapter, of confessing our sins to God to be forgiven, but to one another to be healed or to be made whole, to be made complete, to recover. And that is an integral part of our discipleship process, right? Like being able to do that, it lifts a load. It allows us to that means we are living intentionally. It will give us the credibility to be a disciple maker, right? Those are the things and it does free us, and it gives that people in the group, or if it was one other person, the chance to do the same thing. Like that has got to be a greater, and I realize just because I haven't experienced something on a regular basis doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? In any given congregation, there are probably a lot of people hurting and a lot of people helping those who are hurting, and that everybody doesn't know about. Just, in any group, there could be someone who need gas money and someone reaches in their pocket and gives it to them. No one else knows, right? So the body is working. But that, if we can create as part of our culture, that's that discipleship process where more and more, especially men, it's easier for women stereotypically to share things with each other, but especially men in any leadership, whether it's a licensed role or just they're maybe the men's director or they're helping in a class, they've got some leadership where they've been elevated in some way to say this person is capable. The more we make that part of our values, that I think the healthier our body will become in those other areas that we would like to see growth in. I think they naturally will happen as fruit of that.
And if we're going to be in relationship with each other, I think Jordan Peterson, said it in a quote here lately, that man that you're talking about a husband and wife, but, again, you can extend it out to some extent. The fact that your husband drives you crazy is a good thing, because you live together, you can push each other's buttons, you can drive each other up the wall. And that's where he calls it the raw love, raw things of life happen. Mm-hmm. That's how he is comfortable enough of being around you to allow those things to happen that he won't do in front of other people.
Other people, right?
You are safe for each other. Doesn't mean you should be the fool and be abusive or anything like that. But, the fact that he leaves his socks laying on the ground or whatever it is that drives you crazy, that's just a sign to you that he's not going anywhere, right? He's in this thing. And if we get around the body of believers, and again, raising my kids and talking about the hypocrisy and stuff, trust me, you get around any group of people, any length of time, you will find hypocrisy. It's just part of the human nature, right? My nature is not to be giving. My nature is to be selfish. My nature is to strike back. All of these things that are ingrained in the human nature because of our fallen condition. It's there, whether you're a member of the body or not. And so
Right.
if you're around people long enough, you will get hurt. And that is unfortunate, but it's a reality of life in this world. And so why should we feel like the people that are in the body of Christ would be exempt from being human? They are going to do things that are wrong, that are hurtful. Hopefully it's rare. Hopefully it's dealt with quickly. But you just have to understand that's what life is. And so if I'm going to be in a body and I'm participating with a group of believers, at some point I'm going to get crosswise. And then so the question becomes, how do we deal with that? And how does the Holy Ghost help us through that? And again, Jesus even gave instructions on that. Go to them first. And if you can't, take one or two. And if you can't reconcile it, then you bring it to the body as a whole to figure out what's going on there.
But we don't
and
do
Paul
that.
rebukes the church for going outside of the body to deal with these things, right? Why are you taking each other to court? Let's deal with this inside the body. And so it is a reality of life on earth before we get to the other side. And so just going in with that understanding, I am going to have to deny myself. I am not going to get my way on every decision that gets made, not necessarily sin related, but, the color of the carpet or whatever. There are going to be things that get done, or the pastor or the church leadership may decide to go in one direction with the ministry when I really felt they need to go another direction. That's a reality. Okay, so what am I going to do in those moments? Well, again, Paul and Jesus addressed that. Think of them better than yourselves. Let them have their way. It's okay. I'm not going to get everything in this life. It's not going to be made right. I will not get my way every time. I'd be a horrible person if I got my way every time.
No doubt.
There are going to be things happening that I'm not going to like, I'm not going to agree with, and I will be hurt. And it could be conscious decisions by people. It could be unconscious decisions by people. It could be misinterpretation of situations by myself or others. And so that's going to happen. And it's messy, but it's life.
Yeah. Well, I think,
and it's real.
If we're going, I think in American Western culture, we don't like conflict. And if there's not healthy conflict in a body of believers, it's unhealthy. I promise. If you're in a leadership meeting and there's not some vigorous disagreement, I promise you're not accomplishing everything.
You've got a bunch of sycophants that are just doing yes men stuff.
Well, and not only that
you've got the potential for somebody to take the whole congregation off the rails.
In any small, whether we're in a small group or in a leadership meeting, especially from a leadership perspective, if you're in a leadership meeting, you're not pushing each other, I promise you're not as healthy as you think. I guarantee it. If and I realize this mostly after I've been in different roles, and I'm like, okay, how much should I push? I realize, no, we should be having some vigorous debate. And one of us should probably apologize every now and then, because we're going to push people to the edge to bring out the best. And we do not, by and large, like any conflict. And I remember actually had a good friend, like, I can't follow you on Facebook because I'm going to comment on stuff. And I'm like, you're not really my friend. I'm serious. Like, you're not. If you think you're my brother in the Lord and you then, do you want to say something to me but won't? Grow up. I'm serious. I mean that seriously. Like, I went to him and said, look, if you're unhappy with something I do with my children or my wife, tell me. Be a man. Tell me. Care about me enough, like the scripture says, to tell me. If I do it in public, why would you then not say something right then? And I was serious. I'm serious to this very moment. If you're with me in public and I do something rude to my wife or children, you should say something, brother. You should love me enough. You should believe in the Jesus we claim to follow enough to follow scripture and say, hey, I don't have to talk to you privately. You just acted like an idiot in public, so I'm going to say something right now. I'm going to pull you aside. I'm not even going to pull you and say, hey, whoa, you don't get to talk to your wife that way. What is wrong? What is going on? Like, don't. Love your brothers and sisters enough to love your brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
If we're not willing to do that,
help me be that mature Christian that won't do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and if I act foolish in private, then correct me in private. But if I'm acting foolish in public, love me enough to say something right then. Don't wait 10 years. Don't wait 10 years and say, hey, I saw you do this thing 25 times. Like, why not the first time? You don't need my permission if we're a fellow believer in Jesus and we claim the scriptures to be true. Why would we deny our brother or sister the privilege of loving them? I will tell you that the people I think love me most are the ones that will say something when I do something dumb. You don't love me if you watch me do something foolish and you don't say something. And I would not be loving you if I were with you and you did something detrimental to your family or your faith and I didn't say something. That's not love. That's apathy. That's worse than anything else. And
I
I
don't
think
know if,
we suffer more from apathy than someone just really hurting feelings. So I think when feelings get hurt, we're fearful to go to them. And I went to my brother and said, look, I know you're upset with me, but let me explain. You were welcome any single time. And I said, I really wish you had said something to me 10 years ago. I said, this particular person, this is real. I said, you remember when we were at your house and we were having this discussion and you said this to this person in your family and I stood up and said something and I called you out? I said, that's because I love you. I said, I will do that every single time we ever experience that same thing again. Even if that child becomes an adult and has their own spouse, I will still say something. I said, you know why? Because I care about you. I didn't wait 10 years to be angry and explode over a little thing. I did it then because I love you. You don't need my permission to show me love unless you're just not believing this Jesus and Bible stuff. And I think, and he's like, oh, okay. I was like, yeah.
And I've been on the receiving end of that in a much more kind. The man's, I think I may have mentioned before, the man's name is Brother Gentles. So, and if anybody personified that name, it was
it's good to be gentle. I wish I was.
He was an elder in the church I came into, and I had done something, and it was, I'll go ahead and, this is transparent. My wife, we've talked about it many times since. My wife had fallen ill at church, and so I had taken her home. I'd come back to the church. Now I had 2 cars at the church, and I had to get them both home. Neighborhood's not the best to leave this car overnight. And so a young lady that sang at our wedding says, hey, I can do it, and you can take me home. I thought nothing of it. We left. We took home. Dropped the car off, took her to her house. I'd actually stayed in their house when I was in college. I mean, didn't think twice about it. Next service, next Sunday, he comes out of the prayer room. He pulls me aside. He says, Brother Ross, he says, you're a married man. He said, we'd only been married a short time. That didn't look right. You left this building with another young lady that was not your wife. You don't do that. And broke me right there. I didn't even realize I'd done it, right? It was, again, in my ignorance and my naivety and all this, I didn't even think about it, right? And that stuck with me the next 35 plus years, right? I mean, never done it again and never will do it again, right? Because it wasn't that anything was going on. It's just that
right.
It looked.
No, he was giving you guidance, right? But what's great is he loved you enough to say something. He didn't wait, a long time. And I think that is part of, too, the discipleship process. And too often we have a consumer mentality, right? I struggle with it a lot. And so, even in conversation with my wife, like, hey, we're not consumer. This is not scriptural. This is not what the Lord called us to. And there should be some healthy conflict. Discipleship is going to be us growing. And that desire to never have that it'll make us, I don't think we can live intentionally, and I don't think we can disciple others if we're not thoughtful about those things, right? Like that, I don't think we make it very far through the process of creating a culture within the body of believers we're part of if we're not willing to do those things. And this also is a good friend, a friend that I've had many discussions with, and I could tell he genuinely appreciated it. I'm thinking, we shouldn't have to have permission or think we need that to do what the brother did for you, or, what I share with my friend, like, look, I would stand up and say something again. I expect you to do the same for me. And that process helps us grow and lets us know that people care. And clearly things should be done kindly. And that's something but kindness is not the same as not. Kindness is calling those things out.
This is not niceness, right? Jesus
Correct.
was not nice. He was kind, but he was not nice.
Yes.
Right. He called a spade, and he talked. And I think we've been dwelling on the negative side of things as well. I think also there's the positive side of things, right? I need to lift you up. I need to encourage you. I need to tell you when you are doing a good job, or I understand your struggles. But my 2 adult children, married, have kids. Both of them have been through some job situations, and they're in some financial stew right now, and we've helped them out as we could. But also, I think the biggest thing for them is, hey, I've been there. Okay, I have been overdrawn at the bank, and I didn't know where I was going to do things, and I had to go take care of something else. And the only thing I could do was work with the cash I had on hand, because I couldn't use any of my banking or credit cards that I have at the time. I've been there. I understand, but I promise you, you're going to get through this, right? It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So hang in there, and try to talk about, here's some things, offer some advice, but hey, you're doing a good job, right? We had a lady at our church that she just recently moved back her husband had to take a job out of town. He's gone longer than they planned. So she's finally gone to join him, but he had 6 kids, and she's coming into church. And I mean, I'm sorry. I'm like, hey, you came,
Right.
2 sets of twins. I mean, we're talking like
Well,
9-month-old twins and diaper, and you got them all in the van at the same
That's
time, and
pretty
you got
impressive.
them here, and they were clothed. You're here. We're glad you're here, And so to provide that encouragement to those people and to be able to support them, right? And to be that and to be that model that Jesus had, right? He rebuked those that were arrogant. He rebuked those that thought they had it all together. But those that were broken and hurting, you never got that out of him, right?
He would meet people where they were. Yes. And he certainly expected the leadership to understand scripture, where they understood rules, but not relationships, or they would understand sacrifice, but not mercy. And I think, again, one of the things I appreciate about the book was the intentionality of disciple making and discipleship. As you get through the book, one of the things I think they talk about is, or Brother Gleason mentions, is like with new believers, pairing them up with, right, a person who gets baptized, that very intentional, letting them know what that is when they get baptized, pairing them up with another, if it's a single person, right, someone appropriate to mentor them. If it's a family, someone appropriate to mentor them. That intentionality within a group of believers of, you're now embarking on a process that is a lifelong, and it is messy. Because the more, if you're the one mentoring me, disciple, you and Tanya, and if Courtney and I were the new believers in your congregation and they paired us up, that friction you mentioned, the seeing each other at our best and worst, because if we're getting together, whether it's once a week or every other week, and our family's having a meal together, we're doing something to really disciple, not just saying hello inside the building, but really investing the time, our resources, time and money. Then we're going to see that in each other. And if we're intentional, that allows me as the new believer to experience what does it mean to be corrected, to be kindly corrected and grow. That helps me model it when I am then in that role to disciple another. And it helps us both, I think, both parties. But I love that they're very intentional about that. And I think that and I realize how difficult that is. One of the big concepts I think that he talks about, that partnering up the new believer with someone to guide them. Again, realize that a congregation has got to be intentional and willing to participate, because you can't say, well, these three families are really good at this, they're going to do it all. Nope, it can't be. You have to say, okay, once we are here and we're fellow followers of Jesus, we're going to help someone who's a little bit further behind us. We just need to be a few steps ahead. And a few steps ahead is different at every stage of life, stage of discipleship. But that intentionality, I also think that if a body really buys into that, the other things that most congregations struggle with, like we need a bigger building, or we need to do this, I believe a lot of that will be easier, not easy, but easier to manage. Does that make sense, right? Because the focus is first on creating that healthy body, and then the rest will be provided, I think, from that. Does that silly, or?
We see it exemplified in so many other areas of life outside the church, right? We're in the middle of March Madness right now. We've already had a few of our upsets, right? And you've got these coaches that show up to these small schools or failing programs, and they're not worried about the talent level to begin with. They're worried about the commitment and the mindset. And what happened with the Detroit Lions in the NFL, right? He comes in there and says, we are going to kneecap people. We're going to be the last guy fighting. We're going to push past this. We are not going to just be these guys that show up and do our thing and go home and make our millions of dollars. And who cares if we win or not, right? And so you get that taken care of first, and you transform the culture. Then you can worry about the skill sets and the talent that you have and all this stuff like that. And you almost always, in fact, I think it probably can't say always, that group will overachieve, right? They're going to do more than what their skill sets collectively say they should be able to do. And I believe it's absolutely true in the church as well, right? We don't need, and Jesus, again, exemplified, we don't need the best and the brightest necessarily. Yeah, we're going to have some of those, right? We're going to have a Dr. Bernard. We're going to have some of these brilliant people come along, these incredibly charismatic speakers and incredibly motivating speakers and incredibly passionate speakers that come along with a particular ministry. But, by and large, if everybody's bought in, then it's going to take care of itself, right? And then
right.
And we had a situation here recently, a fairly new member of our church. He's been to Bible school, but I'm not 100% sure all the background, stuff like that. And he spoke a word to somebody in our church and they got all upset about it. And like, well, I just don't know. Well, I'd rather have that than nobody giving a word to somebody in a church, right? Let's let some stuff happen first. Let's get some activity going. And then if we need to reel it in, we can. That's exactly what Paul had, right?
It's a lot easier to steer a car that's moving.
Church wasn't that people weren't speaking in tongues, is that they were doing it in a chaotic, crazy way. And they weren't, it's just like, okay, we need to discipline this back a little bit. But I think too many of our churches are on the other end. We need to get some life going first. Let's get somebody doing the tongues and interpretation, and then we'll worry about if we have 2 or 3 or 4 or more, right? And so we need to allow people the opportunity to try to do ministry and just reach out and speak to people and to minister to one another. And if it gets out of hand from there, we'll worry about that later, right? But let's get everybody bought in and committed and doing what they can. And you're going to make mistakes in that process. That's okay.
Well, even just think within that example, if a local congregation has a healthy focus on, I'll say discipleship, small groups, right? The big meetings are fantastic. In my old age and crotchetiness, I guess, I think we miss something very important if there's not that intentionality in the small group. Even if it's just the pastoral team doing it, that's not enough. And I realize not everybody is, but if the culture is not set to that way, let me back up. When it is that way, when there is a healthy intention in smaller gatherings along with the larger, but then you can have the discussion. Why was this okay? What do we need to do? And then if 3 or 4 people are having the discussion, they can be edified. They can be educated. There can be the dialogue back and forth, right? But if the only time people talk to each other is when they're in the building, the designated place where we think about Jesus, then we're going to be limited. There's no way we're going to mature in our walk with Jesus. There's no way we can be a disciple. We can be a believer, maybe even a really good hearer of the word, and we can repeat back to things. But I do not believe we will be a good disciple, nor will we be a good disciple maker, because we will not have invested the time in just what would, that if you had a small group, the person who did the speaking, this person who received it, yourself and one other, if there were 3 or 4 couples or 4 or 5, let's say for discussion, if it's all men and 3 or 4 you guys got together and you were having coffee or, coffee at your kitchen table, you can discuss that in depth. You can have a great discussion around that, right? And everybody can learn, whether it's the person receiving or giving, and you go, oh yeah, okay. But if we don't have those moments, so much will be lost. And so in it, I think there's that opportunity to think about how can we be intentional? How do we build that in? And I think if we do, again, we go back to my Chick-fil-A example where Kathy is talking to his leadership team. Like, we got to get, the team is like, we need to get bigger. We need more stores. And he's like, if we take care of the customers we have, they will demand we get bigger. That's when they started implementing them. It's my pleasure type thing. I will say that the application to the body of believers is, okay, we understand certain aspects. We understand many things well about the gospel. We can make some improvements in other aspects of living like the early church and the discipleship and some of these things. And if we begin to implement that, we can create a very healthy culture of discipled believers. And if we make this, again, part of the values, we say culture, but values of our congregation, as more people are discipled and participating in that process, the body will grow. And then the money we need to kick out a wall or to finish the gym or to build the building will be there, because we will have so many, relative to our current size, whatever our current size is, believers who are really discipled and growing, and that, that body growing and being healthy, then it'll be a lot easier to accomplish the other things, whether it is, in my opinion at least, finding people to help during the Sunday morning events, whether it's a Sunday school class or whatever, because many congregations are like, oh, we don't have enough volunteers. We have enough people, but not enough volunteers. So I think, well, maybe if we have this focus on discipleship more and some of the things we do outside the building, and we create healthier members of the body, filling those roles will become a lot simpler. I don't know. Is that completely contrary to
Well,
what?
I think you've captured a good chunk of the essence of some of this stuff that we're reading on in this book right now. Is um, get the people bought in, get the people participating, get the people doing what they need to be doing, and connected and accountable, and all the things that we've already talked about, and then the rest is it's gonna be a natural outgrowth of that, right? Yeah, you don't force a tree to produce fruit, right? You create a healthy tree, and then
Right.
you get fruit.
You get the soil, there's things, right? There's pieces we can do. We can make the soil as healthy as possible, right? We can trim off the dead branches. If it's a tree, right? You can make sure it's got access to sunlight. How do you, as you all are part of a small and growing congregation. And I think one of the benefits of that is it is a lot simpler. I don't know if easy is the right word, simpler, maybe easy, to make significant changes when you're smaller, because the ship is not so large and difficult to turn around. I know Brother Shaw himself, I spent some time with him not long ago, and we were talking. He said, yes, for a number of years, really encouraging our leadership team to think small groups, all the things we're discussing. But it's such a significant size. Changing the values is very, very challenging. When you're a smaller congregation, fewer departments, fewer people to have to change how we do things, how do you see, I know what I think about in my mind, but you're part of that as you and your leadership team, as you're talking about these things and looking at them and discussing them and probably trying to implement, how are you implementing or would like to implement? How can you see the things that you've been reading and we've been discussing? I know your team probably is as well. How can smaller congregations or starting congregations apply this to the positive? Apply this either if they're going or they're getting ready to start. Maybe they consider themselves a church planter and they're going to go into some place with the intention of building up the body.
I think the biggest thing, and it comes out in the book if you read it all the way through, is that we have to be patient. We have to let God do what he's going to do, right? And you've got to stay true to what it is you're trying to do, right? In fact, we're actually doing a reset. We're having, ironically tonight, a leadership meeting and talking about that. We were trying to launch a couple of other ministries last year, but the leadership kind of feels our established ministries are really not where they need to be right now. So before we go off and do this other stuff, which is good, and we need to do that, we really need to make sure we're rock solid over here and that these are truly meeting the needs that we have in this process, right? And so, the idea that if it takes months, weeks, years to develop a disciple, right? But once you get one, they're stuck, right? But that takes a long time. And especially when you're starting out, if you're the planner, you're the one, right? And so you are that discipler. Well, you can't do that to more than a handful of people at a time. Again, correct. Jesus had 12. He lost one and he only really focused on 3. So you're human and probably working, right? So you've got a job you got to go to. Now you got to do this on the side. So you're not going to be able to do this to 20 families, right? You're just not.
No doubt. Yeah, no.
And
right.
if you try to do that, you're going to burn yourself out.
Yes.
And now there's not a church at all, right? There's nothing going on. And so understanding the process, where you are in the process and being very clear and intentional about being in that process, right? And allowing God to do what God only can do. Our pastor's wife is a tremendous Bible study teacher. She just does them all the time. But I mean, she's 12 weeks or longer with a person or a family before she goes on. She may have 2 going on. Typically it's 1 at a time, because she knows it's going to take time, effort, energy to pour into that family or that person, that individual, and get them going and get them understanding and obviously building that relationship with them so they can have those questions. But she's just in the background, and she's doing it all the time. Just kind of serially one after the other, couple at a time. But over time, that is going to be something you see the fruit of.
Yeah. And so being able to have leadership model it, and then especially if your leadership team, I think, gets committed to, I think he mentions in the book too, that everybody is discipling someone, but especially if the leadership team from the lead pastor or the pastor, however it's set up in a particular congregation, is investing time in a person or a family. I want to be better at it as a family. Look, I feel like, okay, I'm learning in my process. There are people who are pouring into me individually, and I'm trying to do the same. But I also know the next step for Courtney and me, which she's least comfortable with. She says she listens to this, so in a couple of weeks, she'll tell me what she thinks. Is the next step for us is to be very intentional 2 ways. Us spending time with a couple who can disciple us as a couple, right? Help learn from them. And then the next step, or really at the same time, we should be trying to do the same for another couple, right? And to me, that means We are going to be intentional in getting together with them outside of the 3200 Century Park Boulevard. We're going to spend time together in our house, their house, at a restaurant, but a time where we're investing our resources, time and money. Hopefully there's food. The early church spent, we could do a whole nother episode on what communions was like then versus now and what that could look like, which I think would be really interesting, maybe a series of those. But there was a lot of fellowship, and they did that daily. There was food, fellowship, edification, that getting together, and that's the messy, difficult part. But I think, again, if leadership teams have that focus and they go, okay, we're going to, and really, in a commitment, in a small group, I realize, like in the small groups I'm part of, there might be 10 guys and 3 show up. Or one of my coffees, there's usually 3 of us. There might be 7 people collected, right? Or the Thursday breakfast that I've been to a few times, I understand there's probably 15 guys, maybe. Yeah. There's a pretty significant group, but there's pretty consistently somewhere 6 to 8 people, right? Pretty consistent. And so I realize if you're in some sort of on the leadership team, a pastor, some leader in a congregation, you might have, if you're being real intentional, there might be 2, an individual, a family. That's a lot. If you have a couple that are pretty consistent, but if that becomes part of the values, imagine the impact that has, right? In knowing that it does, it's not just, here's it's 12 months, we're having dinner together, a number of times a month or something. But if over a year or 2, that person that you've been discipling, you've got to the place where you're like, hey, you're growing, you've got to do the same, because sister, you're like, Brother Joe and Sister Susie just started coming. You all need to be doing this with them, right? And you begin to create that. Then when you're going, okay, we need that next ministry. Like we want to do this program. Okay, well, and as you all talk, you're like, well, in this group, there's brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. They've really grown and they have that talent. But because, right, you've been even more deeply connected, we're learning people's talents and strengths and desires to further those opportunities that come up. Go, oh yeah, we need to make this team stronger. Who have we been talking to, right? Oh, this one, they've really grown. They're really, whatever, they could fill that need. I think there's a lot more. Does that make sense? Like that even gives us back to those resources where we want to, because right, we want the discipleship. We want to engage them. We want to involve them. And so I'm excited for you all, because as you all do that too, in a smaller, I'm thankful there's a lot of smaller growing congregations in the area, because I think that becomes not only the success for you all very specifically as you implement these things, but it also positively reinforces when we can talk about those stories, so that as the larger congregations in the area are looking, so we want to try new things, it's working. It's helping us fill the roles that the larger congregations struggle with, because everybody believes someone else will do it. And Brother Shaw, Brother Bernard, they're all very candid about that challenge of, the larger the congregation, the easier it is for Brian to assume that David's doing it, and David to assume Brian will do it, kind of thing. And so you all can
even things like cleaning the church, right? Or mowing the property or whatever like that. Yeah. And for us, it's, staffing Sunday school and the children's stuff and all this stuff like that. Just everybody pitch in. We don't have a staff. It's us. And so let's do this.
And I think even my hypothesis is, as more congregations, it'd be really great to talk to Brother Gleason someday to see how it impacted his congregation in the various ways. Because especially as families are discipling families and kids are just part of that process, it makes me wonder how. I believe that as we do that very intentionally, that we will find ways to resolve other challenges in ways we haven't done them before, if that makes sense. I often constantly think of how do we keep our young people engaged, because we lose them right when they go to college. Well, I don't think it's just...
Creativity comes out of need, right?
Yeah.
If you have a true need, that's when people get really... If you've got limited resources, that's when people are at their most creative. And so we should be seeing some really novel, unique ways of dealing with some of this stuff coming out of some of these situations.
Yes. I have found that in conversations that are multi-generational, it's very interesting, the things that can, the discussions that can come up and getting young people involved in it. I think there's a great opportunity when families are engaged with those other families in that same process. So I look forward to hearing how things work out with you all as you implement this. And I think one of the things that would be great, you're working on your own podcast. Have you given it a name yet?
Yeah. I've got an email address. I've got a bunch of other things revving up. So I'm going to be revving up on this stuff here. And
have you started the first one yet, or have you released the first one?
I've recorded it about 4 or 5 times. One of these days, I'm going to be satisfied with my first one and get it out there so I can start getting.
Let it be less than perfect. Let it be less than perfect.
It's going to be less than perfect. Yeah, I've just got to move forward, right? And
once that's up,
filling that dash that's going to be on my tombstone someday, I've got to start filling it in. So,
once that's up, we'll share it with the few people who listen to ours and share that success. And as I think one of the things that I would like to at some point encourage everyone who does a podcast to do is look for those successes where someone or congregation is doing small groups, or they're along with focus on discipleship to highlight what can be, the positive of what can be, because it is a huge opportunity. We're hearing about young people going to, there is a conversion even with unchurched people looking for the Lord. They're going to they're open to things, but that the authenticity that people are looking for, especially younger people today, I think they will find that in those smaller settings where people are transparent. And again, not the authenticity of the guys who are like, oh, I'm a jerk and I'm just going to be that. And they're the guys that have the podcast. They're all about profanity and they're telling people how to run their business, and they work 20-hour days so they can make their first 10 million or whatever. That even people in the world eventually learn they can't live that way. That's not authentic. It destroys families. It might be fun for a while. It's not the long-term thing. The authenticity of, hey, we're working through this together. This was my struggle. Here's how I overcame. You can too. You think I've got it together. Some days I do have it together, but there are days that I fail miserably. It might be different than your failure, but it feels the same pain to me. And you, me, and Jesus, we're going to make it through this together.
Right. Yeah, my current employer has a philosophy. They call it 10-10. There's winning, but then there's winning the right way. And
that's good.
You don't want to be one of those guys that reaches the pinnacle and have left a trail of destruction behind you, right? So, do it the right way. Winning is always better than losing. We want to win. We want to be successful. We need to be successful in the marketplace, but we want to do it the right way, and that includes how we treat our people and how you bring yourself to work every day. So, yeah, I work for a rather unique unicorn in the corporate world, for sure.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, so for people who haven't got the book, get the book. Oh, let's see if I can move it the right way. Got to go reverse, follow to lead, read it. It's a great small group book. It's great for leadership. Clearly, if someone's pursuing, I say licensed ministry, but that's our organization's way of recognizing the body, recognizing someone's putting in the effort, they're having fruit, and there's guidance around that to help them. But it's a fantastic book for anyone. Again, probably should be given maybe not the first day to a new convert, but pretty close. Like, hey, this is going to be part of the process. You don't have to be much further ahead than someone else to help lead them. And it really does enhance, like, to close this out, I'll let you have the last word. But one of my thoughts is the more I am engaged with others in that process of trying to be more like Jesus, to be a better follower, it's a positive spiral of, I want to study scripture more. I try to pray more. I wish I could tell you, Brother David, that I just naturally do those things. Being consistent is very, very difficult for me. For some people, my wife checking a list, she's excellent. It drives her. Me, that consistency is one of the things I struggle with. Yet, whether it's you and I talking, getting together with the group with breakfast, or the guys for coffee, those moments, and like I said, the one just a couple Thursdays ago where I experienced that, the vulnerability, the transparency, the encouragement, the little bit of rebuke in a positive way, it helped me, it pushed me to spend more time talking to the Lord. Like, hey, I've got to figure that. I say I got to figure out, the prayer was mostly, Lord, help, because I am not sure how to really let go and not take that thing back. But all of that intention of trying to be a better follower of Jesus made me want to dive in more. And
absolutely.
And so we'll let you finish the last thought, and then I'll.
I don't think I can add much to it. I think this has been a great conversation. Looking forward to continuing it and seeing where things go from here. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that intentionality of the life lived. Right. If I am going back to that prayer, Lord, break me, search me, break me. If I'm going to pray that, I want to mean it, and I have to walk in that integrity. And when I get it right, and I was talking to somebody, we had a men's retreat last weekend, and I was talking to one of the men on Friday evening or Saturday morning. I said, yeah, every now and then I get it right. I get those moments of clarity where all I want is him. I know just nothing else will do, right? And then the next morning I wake up and life hits me again. And I look back and I'm like, I'm not feeling that right now. I'm holding on to things. I'm not wanting to release them over to him. And, if I could get more moments of clarity where I'm completely sold out for what he wants me to do. And that's going to happen as I continue to engage with him personally and privately in my own devotion. But it definitely is going to be enhanced and improved in those moments when I'm with others and I can be transparent and we can share with each other and support each other and hold each other accountable. I will get more and more of those moments of clarity as my life goes on.